Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed this video. In addition, in the link in the description, there's a place to go and vote for what deck I should do for my 1000 subscriber video. So please check that out, and then stick around for the rest of this video. It should be a lot of fun. Alright, so hello everyone. I'm here with Eric Keelback, also known as Whiteblade111, fresh off a 6th place finish at Worlds, here to talk about one of the decks that you were running, in particular your runner deck. I'm hoping to do a series of these with the Snare Bears. This is probably going to be the first one out. You were the only one running this deck, but it's a really fun deck, and so I figured we should talk about it. So
I did the tournament classic, which is like prepare, like, so all the other Snare Bears brought Freedom basically, and I also tested a ton of Freedom. It was very clear to me early on that Freedom was good, and I was just like, oh, I'm gonna play Freedom. Freedom's super cool. But I really love playing TagMe. That's the problem. I just love playing TagMe. I feel like every good network, like, it was kind of like, I feel like my TagMe is like Pencil's Hive Mind Max, where like Pencil just jammed Hive Mind Max at every tournament, even when it wasn't good. And so I was just like, I'm gonna play TagMe. Zahya, it's a deck I've been playing for about 2 years now. I would say pretty much nonstop. I think there have been some formats where like I've played something else, but like almost anytime I'm going to like a tournament, I try and bring TagMe. I've been playing TagMe as an archetype, like probably seriously for about 5 years now.
yeah, so for those of you who haven't, and hopefully I can actually figure out how to do this, there'll be a link in the video to another video of the two of us discussing TagMe, but that as TagMe Liza, which was a real force back in 2019.
Oh my god, that deck was so busted. So I'll just talk briefly about TagMe as an archetype, the history, and then like I'll go into why I decide why I play TagMe. So TagMe can mean a lot of different things. Historically, a long time ago, there's long discussions about like, so there used to be DLR, which like you took a tag and then you had Wireless Net Pavilion and Paparazzi, and like you just milled the corp, and that was called TagMe. And then in Red Sands, you had Counter Surveillance come out, which was like a win condition, because like one of the sub themes in the Anarch set was tags, and so you had like it's looking back on it, it's like those cards were so busted, dude. But at the time, you had like cards like Mars for Martians, God of War, and Counter Surveillance all came out in the same cycle, Red Sands.
Yeah.
And Obelisk came out in Flashpoint. And so you were like, oh, you have this like tag me deck, and so like the idea was you just got a bunch of tags, and then like you played Counter Surveillance, and that wasn't really a thing until Worlds 2018, because Tag Me had always sort of been this Anarch thing. Like I played Counter Surveillance Edward Kim at Worlds 2017. Really, I think Tag Me became the way, like the format we see it today is in and then like there's Tag Me and Max, like you could play Tag Me and Max as well. Like it's just the Counter Surveillance and like God of War, and like you said, all these tools. It just turned out to be like really good. And then in 2018,
Max was like the first home of Tag Me decks, really. I think.
Yeah, I would say in like a serious way, because it just turned out that like it's kind of counterintuitive, right? Because like in some sense, the Tag Me deck is like a run aside combo deck. It just turns out that there's enough recursion in the game, like with Deja Vu and stuff, that the draw is actually just worth it. And you only need to really land one Counter Surveillance to win the game. So it's fine if you mill your Counter Surveillance or whatever. Like the odds were just you drew a Counter Surveillance and you could Deja Vu one back, and like you had all these tools. And so like Tag Me Max like was a thing. You had like Siphon Max. You had like all these different tools. And then there's the ban list update. DLR rotated out of the game. It's like, okay, what are we gonna do? Well, Rain and Reverie came out in 2018. And it had probably one of the most powerful runner IDs printed, which is Liza. And basically people wrote it like Kenny. I remember Kenny won a regional in New York with Take Me Liza, and like most promotions got banned before Worlds. And Austin, Ice Cold Jazz, top 16 on Liza. And then people just stopped playing Tag Me because the problem was High Profile Target had come out as well. So you had this problem where like High Profile Target just killed you. If you got like 10 tags taking 20 meat damage, like it didn't matter what, you couldn't like really prevent the damage with Obelisk. And then me and like a bunch of other Americans at the same time were like, well, Counter Surveillance is good, Liza's good. What if we play Paparazzi Dummy Box? And that was incredibly good. That was like that basically ran a table in the 2019 Nationals meta.
Yeah.
And they got banned. And then we're looking at 2020 APAC. 2021 APAC, 2021 APAC. And me and a few of the people were like, Zahya had just come out, and we were like, well, tags are good. There's not a lot of kill decks. Like, let's just play Tag Me. And it's basically like this is the same deck. And so like, why is Tag Me good? So the answer is that like the obvious like level 1 answer is that like so the deck plays all the Tag Me decks can play Counter Surveillance, right? They can play Counter Surveillance. And why is Counter Surveillance good? It's just good because like if you have 8 tags, accessing 8 cards from Undy is good. And that sounds silly, but like it's just true. It also like it's like a really surprisingly flexible card too. Like it doesn't look like it, but it has a lot of tools that you can use. Like if you have Dummy Box, you can like keep it out on the board and like you're saving a click. You can also Counter Surveillance HQ, which is like pretty powerful because if they have like 6 cards in hand, you just like guarantee you can like pay more credits than they have cards in hand and access every card in hand. And so then the second question is like, okay, well, how are we going to get tags? It just turns out that God of War is too slow.
Yeah.
And what's actually better is to play a bunch of cards that like give you a tag and also generate tempo, because these cards are predicated on the idea that the tag is a downside. And then you're playing a deck where the tags are actually just upside. So like Rogue Trading, for example, is like, I think it's a pretty balanced econ card if you have to like go get a Citadel Sanctuary or you have to clear these tags manually. As soon as you're using Rogue Trading and the tag is just upside, it becomes like incredibly overcurve. Same thing for like Hot Pursuit. Like Hot Pursuit gains you 7 net, which is crazy.
It's like I have a metamate who for the longest time would just run Jessminder. And it's just like, in that deck, paying 6 influence for 3 copies of that is like kind of fair because that ID does so little else. But then there would be those games where it gets ahead and you're like, wait, you just made 7 credits for running HQ? Like it is quite impactful for a single run event.
Exactly. And so you look at the cards, I think, one of the thing, and the last thing is like we're playing in the Zahya ID. So like, why are we in Zahya? Well, it turns out 40 cards is better than 45 cards, especially when we're essentially a combo deck. I don't think a combo deck is actually the correct way to think about this form of it, which I'll get to in a minute. But broadly, it's like, okay, your 40 card deck size and then the ID ability is really good because it means that if you counter surveillance and you don't win the game, you make all the money back because you counter surveillance and then you're like, okay, I'm going to trigger my ID ability. You access 8 cards, you get 8 credits back, which essentially, but because you have to front the money to pay for the counter surveillance, it essentially makes your counter surveillance free, which is not always relevant, but can be often relevant. And then it just turns out that being in an aggressive ID early really synergizes with our game plan. So when you look at the deck, it's actually only playing 8 cards that generate tags, which is pretty low. Because the secret is you don't need that many tags to win the game. I think of Counter Surveillance kind of like Deep Dive in the sense that like you are an aggressive criminal deck that has like this combo like win con finisher. And the reality is like when you think about the math of it for a second, like it's really hard, I think, to counter surveillance for over 8 cards in this deck often, just in terms of like getting tags, especially if they're like vigilant again about trashing the rogue tradings. And so then you end up in a situation where, I mean, like, I think anecdotally a lot of players can understand that, like, I think you see like 8 cards on deep dive, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of times where you deep dive and see like 1 agendas or no agendas.
It happens way
so, like,
more often than you think. Yeah.
Yeah, and so like the idea that like you counter like counter surveillancing for 8 and like seeing 4 agendas is just not a coherent game plan. Even back in the days when like I was like you playing like the way more powerful version of this deck out of Liza, you would counter surveillance for 15 and still miss sometimes, like not see 4 agendas. And that's like, you have to have a way to like still win the game. And the way we sort of get around that problem is we're like, okay, it turns out that like just Docklands Pass plus running HQ a bunch gets us a lot of agendas. Because if you think about like aggro crim and why it's not a deck in the format, is the problem is like it can get to 4 points and then it just stalls out, because it turns out that the cost of like singling R&D or like the multi-access to get into R&D is so weak that you don't have a reasonable way to close the game out. But the TagMe deck is like, well, actually, I have rogue trading, I have like all these tag pieces, and then like I'm just gonna see the top 7 of R&D to close the game and steal my last 4 points.
That's a really nice way to think about it. Because like I think
Yeah,
it was really interesting when 419 got unbanned. We're like, okay, we're back in the crim meta, and then it's sort of like, wait, why didn't this become a crim meta? And I think that's a really nice, succinct explanation as to why. And then also a compelling reason that's like, you know, I think everyone's like, oh, TagMe is just a fluke, but it's like, no, it has a real compelling reason to be a good deck, which is, you know, you get to play a really solid game plan, play good netrunner, and then have a really nice finisher as well. I think it's pretty cool.
It's like you kind of get to play. It's like you kind of get to play all these cards that in a vacuum are really greedy, like, because we don't have a close. Like if you played these cards without counter surveillance, you'd lose way more games because you don't have a closer. So you're just like, wow, 2 Docklands Pass and like you're playing 3 jailbreaks. That's super greedy, and it is. But you can afford to be greedy because you have a way to win the game. And like you just win a lot of matchups by just rolling just rolling people early, because you're like, okay, I'm gonna run HQ. Did you res? Did you not res? Okay, I'm gonna jailbreak R&D and gain 2 credits. The Zahya idea is just the Zahya is a really powerful idea. Actually, I don't think a lot of people realize that. Like one of the reasons that TagMe Zahya is good against sports metal is not because you see 7 cards off R&D, it's because you can check R&D for a credit. Like checking R&D gains you a credit, and freedom in that exact spot is like checking R&D when you don't have any viruses installed is such low equity, because seeing a random card off R&D is whatever, but freedom clicks for credits. And so Zahya allows us to click for credit and get an access, which is just really good in matchups where we need to be aggressive. And you end up in this. So that's kind of like the structure of the deck. Is it's like it's TagMe Crim, but it's not really focused on going all in on counter surveillance. It's just like a very solid aggro criminal deck that can transition into this like really powerful win condition. And it allows you to be flexible, I think, in a really nice way, where you can approach each matchup as like, how am I going to balance that ratio? So you look at some matchups and you're like, okay, I need to be more of the combo deck in this matchup and less aggressive, because I get paid out less for being aggressive. And you look at other matchups and you're like, okay, against Egg Infusion, like the combo plan like almost just doesn't even work. So, yeah. But the Egg Infusion is really weak to being like aggressive runners. So you just need to be like 80% aggressive and 20% combo, and you have to like evaluate that every time you sit down at the table, and just be like, okay, like what's my game plan?
I want to ask a more deep question first, but like, did you end up playing this against any of the Ag Infusion decks?
So I played against. It was really funny. I played against Matthew Scry in the top cut, and I was like, oh, he was like worried to play against me because he rolled Egg Infusion, I rolled TagMe Zahya, and I was like, I think this is like a 20-80 matchup for me. Like I don't understand how I win, and he was like, yeah, but you're like a TagMe god, and so if anyone can find a way to win this matchup, it's gonna be you. And then I won in that matchup. I actually had a sick line where I basically like counter surveillance I like install counter surveillance R&D, get egg infusion to the archives, jack out, install second counter surveillance, credit perfect the counter surveillance R&D, and steal like an agenda that was 3 down.
Oh, that's nice.
And the way I just won that matchup was like I got to like 3 points, and then I just like ran HQ a bunch because that deck. One of the problems is like the agenda just build up an HQ. You don't have a great way to cycle, and the spin doctors are really valuable. And I just won by running HQ a bunch, and like I think one of the other things.
Oh, so did you knock Scry down into the lower bracket?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And I think the other thing that the Zahya deck gets to do that's like kind of unfair is it gets to play Obelisk.
Yeah. Obelisk is such an interesting card, or like such a fun, powerful effect, I guess.
Yeah, it's like really unique because it's like the entire game can turn on it sometimes. And so I was playing I was not playing Obelisk originally, and the Obelisk inclusion is like credit to Zeechling. They got second at Off the Grid in 2021 with TagMe Zahya, and their big innovation was putting 2 Obelisks in the deck. It's just so good. So a couple things is it synergizes with the Zahya ID, because so like if we run R&D and with an Obelisk installed and there's no IS or whatever, and we get an access, now we're accessing for a credit and a card, which is like just absurd. It's like you turn into mini Liza, but then like it gets even crazier because like once you jail, like now your jailbreaks say draw 3 cards, gain 2 credits, which is like absurd value. And the extra hand size is really good because like a lot of the Jinteki decks are sort of predicated on this idea that you're gonna tax the runner out on like just you tax the runner out on clicks, right? So you do like 3 net damage and then you have 2 enhanced, so you have to drop. But with the Obelisk, you can have like 10 cards in hand.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. And like I played against a P, and I knocked a P out of I knocked Austin, who was playing Personal Evolution, into the lower bracket just by being like, hey, I have 12 cards in hand, and like that's how I beat Matthew. Is like I still noble to win a game because like when I was running R&D, he can keep running HQ, he can keep rezzing an enemies, but I have 10 cards in hand. So like, what are you gonna do?
Yeah.
I also think one of the powerful, like obviously having 10 cards in hand is like good from like a net damage, like meat damage perspective, but it's also just good from like an options perspective. You like end up sculpting these hands that have like massive flexibility.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's interesting because hand size is often a thing that we're like, oh, it's not that valuable for runners. Like sometimes it's nice as a tag tech, but like you don't usually a plus hand size card on its own doesn't do anything for you. You really need like the plus hand size cards that see play end up basically being ones that also draw you cards in some way. And Obelisk is sort of the premier one that both draws you cards and gives you that plus hand size.
Yeah, it's one of those really interesting things because like you're ostensibly playing as a tech card for like Boom or whatever, and then it just turns out to be like really good versus PD. Because like the tempo of just getting singles goes up, and I really feel like any deck that can like single for free, like when the value of a single goes up, it's really good. There's this idea I think in card games where it's like you want to put yourself in positions to be lucky, and when the value of a single is high because you're getting additional resources, you're just putting yourself in so many more positions to be lucky and like hit a 2-pointer. Which is like really good for the deck. It plays into the aggro game plan. You just get accesses.
One of the ideas I always think about, and I'd love to like one day make a real video about this like theory of runner side economy, where it's like most decks are trying to figure out how to get their 18 random accesses to have a 50-50% shot of winning the game, and like hitting a remote is often a way to like take that number down, but that usually requires more resources. But then there's like this idea of like, hey, like a single like is maybe worth, you can spend maybe a credit on it, but once it starts becoming 2-3 credits against you, it's pretty rough. But when it starts becoming credits for you, that shifts the whole odds of like how hard it's going to be to win so heavily. Like it shifts it so much more in the runner's favor. I think it's some interesting ways.
Yeah.
Should we talk about the core pieces of the deck, and then also we'll maybe separate out like the cards you swap in and out for what the kind of core components are?
Yeah, so broadly, I think it's like, the core pieces is like you're gonna play 3 diversions, 3 hot pursuits, 2 Dockland passes, 2 obelisks, 2 counter surveillance, 3 rogue tradings, 3 class acts, always 100%.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like economy and they're good. You're also not gonna cut any of the tag cards. You're not gonna cut the sure gambles. I think the breaker suite, like the Amina Bagalto paperclip, I'm like pretty happy with. I
Mm-hmm.
think the format would have to get really fast. If the format got really fast for some reason, I would cut the paperclip for Tycoon.
Okay.
But I think that like the format would have to be like really weird for that to be correct. The paperclip is nice because it just plays in your, like, you may have noticed, like, you're just playing good breakers. Like this deck just
Yeah.
plays good breakers.
Yeah,
And
this
you
is
have
a totally normal breaker. Outside of Mayfly, like this is just a completely normal criminal breaker suite. Like,
yeah, well, it's because Amina, the synergy between Amina and credit kiting is nuts.
mm-hmm.
And Bagalto is best in slot.
Yeah.
And we have 3 influence left. And it just turns out, I think that there's no good way to spend the influence because like you don't want to play, you don't need deuces in this deck. You know, you don't
Yeah,
need
yeah.
pinhole threading. You don't need all these like weird tech cards because like the only tech card you arguably need is Lucky Charm, and you play that in faction.
Yeah.
I think like a lot of the economy you're not going to cut. I think the jailbreaks, I really love them, and I think you'd be hard pressed to cut them. I think the like on the independent of the like something that gets you an access, 2 credits, and a card draw is just really good. I also think that with Obelisk, the synergy is insane. I think like the big cuts, like the big like slots I would cut right now is Lucky Charm, Slipstream, Mayfly, and Amakua.
Mm-hmm. Would you
Uh,
cut the like? Do you were you happy with those at Worlds, or
so not
were they
really.
tech for something you thought that like were they tech for a deck you ended up not seeing?
So basically, what happened was, the deck used to play a single Dirty Laundry instead of a Slipstream,
Mm-hmm.
and the evening. So I was gonna play this deck at Crown. I played this deck at Crown Service, and I was like jamming games with Analyze Chris in the foyer at 3 a.m, and Austin walks by. And Austin is like the he is like the patron saint of TagMe players. Like we all look up to him. He's like my TagMe dad, and he's just like, oh, like what deck you played more? I'm like, TagMe. And he's like, can I look at it? I'm like, yeah, for sure. And he looks through. He's like, wow, we have like the exact same deck, except I'm not playing a Dirty Laundry. I'm playing a Slipstream. And I'm like, why are you playing a Slipstream? And he's like, oh. So the funny thing about Slipstream is you might look at Slipstream and be like, why the fuck is Slipstream in this deck? Well, the answer is counter surveillance allows you to make a run on any server, not just a central server. So let's say, for example, there's 4 ice on R&D, and there's a 1 ice remote that is a rezzed IP block. You counter surveillance the remote, and you break the IP block for 3 credits, and you slipstream into R&D, so that you're like basically encountering the innermost ice, and then you break that ice, and then you get to access R&D, and that's how I won a game in Swiss versus an Acme play.
Okay. Yeah.
And it essentially allows you to like bypass large ice stacks.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, that's cool. I'm gonna play a Slipstream because you said I should play a Slipstream, and it was good. I think the Slipstream's fine. Like I think it's fine tech. I'm not very married to it. I think if I like the Amaku and the Mayfly, I think are sort of like vestiges of like a previous meta.
Okay.
I think like Austin had cut his Amakua, and I think the Amaku is very cuttable. It's just like not good, and the games are too fast, and like most people are teched for Amaku in some way.
Yeah,
Anyway.
and just I feel like Amaku is something like you'd be happy to slap down against like a CTM, and then like it's the one breaker you need to get through that whole matchup. Whereas CTM is just not a force, and Amaku is not even that good against Sports Metal, which is the other kind of deck in the format that was going wide. Or
exactly.
could go wide. So
like Amaku is just not good versus PD.
Yeah.
Because I really hope I'm right. Next activation command means you can't Amaku and ice, right?
No, it does. You can still Amakua a next activation command. Like, Amakua is okay. Like, it's actually not terrible against precision design. Like, if you can get it to like 6 counters, like suddenly PD just folds completely. But like up
Sure.
until that point, like it can be very hit and miss. Um,
I I'm also pretty married to the Lucky Charm. Um, the Lucky Charm is really interesting because if they're like a mid-rangey deck, they like really only have time. They usually put one ETR effect on a central.
yeah.
So they're like, okay, I'm gonna put a border control down and just hope that stops them. And like you can have some really sick turns where like because the combo like comes from hand a lot of the time, you can really obfuscate like what you're representing. So like there's a lot of times where like I'll run HQ, they won't like it's like cheap to get in. Then I install Lucky Charm, then I install Counter Surveillance, then I counter Surveillance R&D. Because the Lucky Charm doesn't need to be installed to see for the trigger to be met.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the like and in like those situations, like if you're wrong and it's not border control, like the Lucky Charm just breaks an end the run subroutine. Because subroutines resolving on ice are corp cut effects.
Yeah.
It also stops Biovault, like Anodic Void. It stops like all this other stuff. And the Lucky Charm also just works on the remotes. I played a game in Crown Servers where like I beat someone because they had an Anodic Void in the remote. And they're like, okay, like they're like pushing for the game winning agenda, like they can't lose. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna like diversion of funds, we'll install Lucky Charm, run the remote, and like win the game because it's stuff you can't Anodic Void again, like you pass the trigger.
Yeah.
So I really like the Lucky Charm. I think it's a really solid one of tech piece, especially as like more and more decks play border control. I think it's very fine. Yeah, I think the core of the deck is just like so tight. I think it's like the Amakua and the Mayfly can definitely be cut for something. I don't know what that something is. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's an interesting space to be in right now.
Yeah, I think it makes sense. Like, and in a 40 card list, like especially in Criminal, and when you have this like combo-y package that you're putting together that eats up a bunch of slots as well, it makes sense that there's the core of the deck is basically the whole deck. And I actually think that's kind of one of the things about, I think basically all the good, or all of the decks that Snare Bears tested this year, is it was like you have all but 3 slots like completely determined by just what has to be in there. And then it's just like, what do you want to do with the last like 2 to 3 slots? So
I should tell the story of how I ended up playing this deck.
yeah.
So I'm gonna play this Freedom deck. I went to go play Counter Surveillance at Crown Service. I lost to Jonas, but besides losing to Jonas, I was like, this deck is so fucked.
And Jonas was playing op, right?
Op.
Chrono Servers.
And it wasn't even I didn't even die. Like I didn't even die. And so it was just like I just like had a really weird draw and like I got tempoed out. I was like, that's fine. But I was like, this deck is so busted. Like I love it, and I love it so much. And like I feel like I have a perception in the community as being the TagMe guy, and I love playing TagMe. So I just like, and like the thing about TagMe I find is like it gets basically no respect. Like, everybody's just like everybody is just like, I'm not gonna play TagMe. I'm not really like, you can't really tech against it. And then they're just like, when I remember I played a game against Matthew who was on PD, and like he sees I'm on TagMe and he's just like, yeah, like I can't win. And so it's just like so funny. But like the problem, I mean, we'll talk about it in a minute, but it like has this really polarized matchup spread. But I was just like, okay, I'm gonna play Freedom. I'm gonna be an adult. I tested this Freedom with all these people. I think the Freedom deck's good. The Freedom deck's kind of a control deck. It doesn't look like a control deck, but it can often play out as a control deck. And I went back to the Airbnb where we were testing, and I was just playing. And I built Freedom, and I got way too fucking drunk. And then I went back to the hotel room, woke up super hungover. I'm writing out my deck list. I have the Freedom deck entirely written out. And I'm looking at the Freedom deck, and I brought the cards for the TagMe deck in my deck box.
You knew what you were gonna play all along.
I just like looked at my list. I looked at my list and I was like, yeah, like because I was playing the egg infusion too, and like now we know the egg infusion was good, but at the time it was like we have no
It was a
idea, and
big
I'd only
risk,
played one
yeah.
game of it. Yeah, it was a big risk. I'd only played one game of it, you know, like I played one game of it before Swiss, and so I was just like, I don't know. I think this corp deck is kind of a meme. Like, am I gonna play the freedom deck all day and feel bad about it, or can I just play the counter surveillance deck and play good? And then so like I talked to Matthew about it, and he like put his arm on my shoulder, hand on my shoulder, and was like, Eric, if you think playing TagMe is the right decision, I support you. And I was like, okay. And then so I had to, I was like, I talked to Analyze Chris was sitting across the table. I was like, Analyze Chris, I need you to unsleeve my freedom deck and sleeve this Zahya deck up while I write out my Zahya list with like 5 minutes left to register. And so that's how I ended up registering the Zahya deck. And it's really funny. Like you look at the, like if you actually like look at all the snare bets, I'm the only one who played Zahya. And it basically got tested not at all. Because like the deck doesn't change. Like the deck, like the reality is I tested a bunch for Canadian Nationals. Like I got second at Canadian Nationals with this deck, basically. And I tested a bunch there and I was like, this deck's sick. You basically only lose to Reality Plus. Yeah. So that's how I ended up the deck. I was super happy with it. I think it's the highest placing TagMe deck to ever place at Worlds. It's like higher than Austin did in 2018.
Well, it depends if you count DLR Max as a TagMe deck.
Sure. I mean, this is Crim TagMe at least.
Yeah, or we could call it a counter surveillance deck, right? Because that's the DLR decks are while they are still TagMe, they're TagMe in a very different way. So
yeah, it's yeah. So and I had so much fun playing. Like I mean, I just have so much fun playing this. Like it's probably like it's probably. I mean, I like the Liza version better, but this is like my favorite archetype in Netrunner on Runner side. Like, it's just so much fun. Cool. And like, I have this secret fear. Like, I've just learned over the years of null signal game ban list, which is like if you really like a deck, you have to play it before it gets banned. Like, one of my favorite quote decks of all time is Neurospike SSO. And like it actually I actually just love that deck. I thought the play patterns were super cool. I thought it was a really interesting like non-linear corp combo deck. And it just got like destroyed when they banned Masscom.
That spillover from going after Gote decks was
I was like, man, this sucks because I would have played this in tournaments if I just didn't think it was gonna get banned. So one of my resolutions was just like I should play this TagMe deck because they might ban a piece from it or something. I don't know.
If someone else does well and they ban a piece, you'll feel so sad forever that you didn't take it, right? So
yeah, and so I sort of seized the opportunity and I did really well at Worlds. It didn't drop a single game at Worlds. Wow. The only game losses I had were corp games.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was a slightly runner meta. It's neat that it wasn't just like 2 decks, but like probably 3 or 4 different runner decks were all pretty solid.
Yeah, it was good.
But that's super cool. Any games stand out other than the one we already talked about against Scry? I know it's been a bit, so no worries.
No, yeah, I played TagMe versus Austin. It kind of felt cool to get a TagMe win versus Austin. Also, that game was insane. I mean, that game was wild actually when I think about it, because it's like basically the game came down to it came down to like a counter surveillance where it was unclear whether I would win or not. And if I didn't win on that counter surveillance, there was a 10 advanced cerebral overrider and a 7 advanced clearinghouse on the board. And so and I almost accessed the cerebral overrider because it was fucking what's the ice called? Odoroshi. Yeah, it was Odoroshi, and I really thought about that Odoroshi trigger because I was like, it could be if it's like 10 advanced clearing, I was like, I'm just dead. But I just decided to throw it down all in the line. I mean, that's one of the things I love about the deck is like sometimes you're just like, okay, baby, I'm just gonna throw it all away on counter surveillance and see what happens. I had a game in Chrono Service versus versus Dave Ghostmeat from Victoria, and I was in a situation basically where it's like, okay, I needed 5 creds to steal Bologna. I'm gonna see like 8 cards. I need to steal 4 points, and the first card I access is a boom, and this is like 4th click. And if I don't trash the boom, they're gonna draw it and kill me. But if I trash the boom, I won't be able to steal Bologna. And I talked like I had Will was on my team, and Sokka, the world champion, and like he is a more conservative player than I am, like very good but more conservative. And he's like explaining to me like, Eric, like the odds are not good, like you can't do this if you got trash the boom and like go to another turn. And like I really think about it, and I'm like, I mean, I came here to play counter surveillance, and I didn't trash the boom. And like next card we hit is Bologna, steal Bologna, and then we hit a 15 minutes to win the game. So I just love it for that. I mean, I think it's basically favored in every corp deck except Market Forces.
Yeah.
That might be. I think it's probably actually a little unfavored. It's probably unfavored into Egg Infusion, but I don't think Egg Infusion's a real corp deck.
Yeah, you think it's just gonna be? It got found out and it's just kind of gone now.
It's too fragile. Like you just lose to too much random stuff, and like you just like the problem is also you like stone cold lose to Hunting Grounds, and it's a 1 influence tech card, and it's like whatever.
Yeah, and even in the what ended up basically be the lower bracket finals, like we saw a Krim with 0 tech have really good lines and like several like 1 and X's to just win on the spot. So
yeah, I got beat by Bridgman who installed 2 Stargates. And that's very good, it turns out.
That's a crazy line.
It was good because it was like, because I'd Stargate, he'd Stargate, and I'd have Egg Infusion, and then he'd Stargate again. Yeah, beat me, you're right. It's pretty incredible.
Oh, that's 2022 Netrunner. What a wild world it's been. But
so yeah, I love the TagMe deck. I think it's good. I mean, I'm going to UK Nationals. I will probably play it at UK Nationals.
All right, UK Nats players, get your Market Forces sleeved up, or get your counter surveillances out so that Eric can sign them for you. I don't know.
Do you think so? I one of the things I think about this TagMe deck a lot is whether it's problematic.
Boy, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I
feel like this is like the thing where like I don't want to do like, this is the NWE Classic, by the way, where they win a tournament with a deck and they're like, this is the most unbeatable deck in the history of Netrunner, it has to get banned. That's not how I feel about it. But I do feel that it's like, it's really good, and it's really good in a way that is maybe unhealthy, in the sense that like, I mean, I was talking to Chris Dyer about it, but it's like, unless you have unless you have Market Forces, you can't do much. Now you can beat it without Market Forces, but it's so hard.
Yeah, it's so hard to interact with this. Like, it's meant to be like, oh, here's this thing that is normally a cost, which is having and holding, like, floating tags. And this deck just says, no, it's really not a cost unless you're playing one of a few cards, one of which has ended up on the ban list for essentially unrelated reasons. Like, High Profile Target was a commonly enough played card in previous metas to make playing TagMe feel like a real risk. Whereas now I think it's like, if you're good at TagMe and put the reps in, like, it just seems like a really solid deck for all of the reasons you've been talking about for the last half hour.
But do you think it's a bad outcome if someone takes a runner deck and practices a bunch and then is very good at it?
No, that's fundamentally what good net owners should be. Like, it's super hard for me to tell that like, it's not my favorite deck to play against. I think because it's so unfavorable, like
it just runs it just runs like PD over. Like, it just runs PD over, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, PD is like a really, like, as a huge PD stan, like, I love that deck. And just sitting down and going, oh, I have like 1, maybe 2 lines, and I just don't get to interact with the main, like, mechanic of what I'm supposed, like, what the control lever is supposed to be for this is really tough. and like that. So maybe like I struggle to call that an unhealthy dynamic, but it's especially because of how rarely I play up against it, and like that's like if a deck is unhealthy and does something cool but isn't played that often, I think that's ultimately not that big of a harm. And if it requires skill to get to that unhealthy level, that's even that's actually to some extent ticks away at that unhealthiness a bit.
I mean, one of the things I think about sometimes is like I agree with you, but then they also banned the BTL government takeover deck, which saw like very low play rates in tournaments.
I mean, I'm not going to defend that ban. I'm not sure it was needed.
No, for sure, but okay, but sure, no, I'm not asking you to defend it, but I'm just saying like if we follow the logical conclusion, like do we think that it's a really interesting question? Like if there's a deck that has 100% win rate but only 3 people play it, like is it a problem? I mean, we are sort of ignoring the big thing, which is that this deck is awful against R+.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's really interesting that like R+ basically it won APAC, right? Got played a lot at the other tournaments, but never actually did anywhere near as well again, and like was basically a non-factor at Worlds. Like people thought it was going to be, and it got banned as if it was going to be. Like it got some targeted bans, in particular Archive Memories, right?
Yeah.
And like I know in testing, we basically said, "Oh yeah, I don't think Freedom should really lose to Reality Plus."
Well, it's the same thing with Woo, the Pawn Shop Woo that Pencil posted, right? Like, I mean, one of the I remember in our discussions we thought about. I was going to play R+ before that list got posted.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, oh, this is really good, and then it turns out like, oh, yeah, Pawn Shop Pencil Woo is just like miserable. I think only one R+ made the cut.
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really, I don't know. It's an interesting question to me. People aren't gonna. I think we're gonna. I'm like I say, TagMe gets no respect. I don't think people are gonna play TagMe at UK Nats.
Probably not. It's interesting because I think like it is a really good deck, but I think also because it's so polarizing, a lot of people don't like playing decks that are super polarized. Like it's either this fear, like, oh, what if I end up against the one person who brings up Reality Plus and that ends up tanking my whole day or something? Because like there can be this thing where like, oh, my deck beats all the decks of the top 16 players are bringing, but there's this middle table deck that people love to play, and if I end up against those too many times, suddenly I don't get to make it to those top table matchups, which I think is often more of a imagined fear than like a reality of the situation. And then like, but if people don't like playing the super polarized deck, it tends to get underrepresented, which then means that like people don't respect it quite as much. So
yeah, I think there's this idea. I mean, especially like, it's so funny because whenever I talk to the Snare Bears about it, I'm like, is anyone gonna play TagMe? And no one is like, no one plays TagMe. Like it's just me. And I talk to like other testing groups, and I'm like, yeah, they're like, no, we don't want to play TagMe. I'm the only. I feel like besides like Austin, I'm the only like high tier super competitive player who plays TagMe.
I mean, I think actually your call out earlier in the video of Hive Mind Max and Pencil is actually a really good like similar deck where like Pencil, I mean, both you and Pencil put up really good results with these decks that no one else is running, and they're really strong in your hands. And like I think there's a much cleaner argument for this counter surveillance deck being much stronger and closer to unhealthy than that Hive Mind Max deck really ever got. But it is.
I just remember watching Pencil jam that deck at so many tournaments, and you watch, and he'd be like the only NWE person on Hive Mind Max. I guess like my view on it is that like, if I play against R+, like that's how it goes sometimes. Like,
yeah.
Like I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's so I don't know if it's gonna get. I personally, it's really interesting. I don't think it's gonna get banned in any way, but I think only because it's gonna continue to be very underplayed. Thanks for doing the interview, man.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And people should check out your podcast
Oh
called
man.
The Shadow
Yeah.
Net. Um,
When are you
uh,
gonna have? When is this? Depending on when this is up, we might have the Worlds episode up.
cool. Yeah, I have no idea
Wait.
exactly when this is going up, to be honest.
Okay. Have a good night, Jeff.
You too, Eric. Thanks for giving me some of your time.